Hi, everyone, and welcome. We are so honored to have a chance to speak with Vienna Williams, a superstar on our team for over 8 years, basically since the beginning of the International Well Building Institute. And Vienna has seen it all. And we're going to dig deep today into one of her expertise areas, which is the movement concept. So my name is Whitney Austin Gray. I help to lead research at the International Well Building Institute. And part of our work globally has been spreading the word, building the movement. And Vienna, when we started this work and talked about healthy buildings, a lot of people did not understand that active buildings, that moving inside space was a critical component of what a healthy building, a well building is. And you have led the charge to help people understand and integrate experts globally to better inform that a healthy well building is not only about air quality, it's about all of the human body systems. And it's really critically important that we think about the built environment and physical movement, physical activity. So we're going to dig into some questions about the movement concept. Vienna's going to share some stories with you, and she's going to tell you about some of her favorite concepts. And we're going to have some fun getting to know more about the movement concept. So with that, I will introduce my esteemed colleague, Vienna Williams, who, as I said, has been here many years, seen it all. I'm also honored that on our team, she is a dog lover, a new mother, and a public health advocate. And I think we'll go in from there, Vienna. Do tell us, what is the movement concept and what is the goal?
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Really excited to dig in. So yeah, the movement concept is really just focused on the strategies that promote physical activity in everyday life, really draws on design, policy, operational strategies that buildings, organizations, that communities can really use to ensure that they're promoting, not hindering physical activity. And this is such an important topic, not only as a champion of physical activity, but as a public health practitioner. Physical inactivity is a really significant challenge that we still face, rose really sharply as we became an industrialized nation, and has remained really stubbornly high despite lots and lots of policy investment and lots of great programming and all of the great things that we know. It's remained really stubbornly high. So about 25% of the adult population is considered physically inactive. So it's a big challenge that we have to solve for. We see these trends not only here in the States, but also globally. Other industrialized nations face similarly high rates, and countries that are going through that transition, we see that same trend kind of taking off. And we know that lack of physical activity is really deleterious for our health. So clearly and consistently, very, very associated with numerous chronic diseases, from higher rates of certain types of cancer, diabetes, all of the classic comorbidities and associated with metabolic disorders, stroke, the list goes on. And it's also really associated with other common public health challenges that we're faced with today, particularly mental health, increased rates of stress. So it's just so deeply tied to health. And we also know that physical activity, that when spaces are really thoughtfully designed to invite movement, that they can really have an influence. And we see the benefits of achieving and exceeding the recommended amounts of physical activity just in so many different ways. So I'm really excited that we have just an opportunity through the work that we do at the building level and at the organizational level to really influence that.
I love that. And I want to hone in on a concept that we've been using at the International Building Institute for over a decade to help people understand that the built environment can enable you to be healthy or disable you from doing so. And one of the components of the built environment we pick on a lot is the chair. And in fact, so much so that in public health, former Surgeon General is quoted as saying that sitting is the new smoking. Can you break down what that means?
Absolutely. Yeah. So while in the intro, I mentioned that physical inactivity is a really specific public health challenge. Well, sitting in particular is a different public health challenge. Those things are definitely intertwined, but we look at them in really different ways. They act independently on health. So what we've seen is that really, despite what activity you might be doing in your day-to-day or throughout your week, that the amount of sitting that you do acts really independently of all of that. The mechanisms on our biology are unique when we're sedentary versus even lightly active. And so we have to address those two challenges differently. The things that might get us moving more are not the same strategies that get us sitting less. So sometimes we have to approach those two things a little bit differently. And from an organizational perspective, one of the things that we've been looking at over the last couple of years, especially since we've all gone remote, gone hybrid, we're spending more time at home. The relationship with the chair has definitely changed, and the relationship with our desk has definitely changed. I think many of us are feeling really tied to our screen and tied to being connected and building that culture on the screen with our colleagues and with our employees. And so that's just one of many examples of how businesses and organizations really have to think very carefully about how they're addressing the sitting challenge, right? That might be separate from the tools and interventions and strategies that they're applying to get people to be a little bit more active and move more throughout their day. So just kind of an example of how those two things act a little bit differently.
Yeah. And, in public health, hopefully we've made the world understand by now that smoking is not good for your health. In fact, it is a direct and causal variant in lung cancer, which is the leading cause of death. What most people don't know is that sitting an accumulative level over your life can also have a drastic impact. So in public health, I think when we say sitting's the new smoking, it's sort of our shortcut way of saying the cumulative impact over a lifetime of sitting can be just as deleterious to your health as smoking. But people don't think of it that way. And, I think we're gonna get into this a little bit more in the interview, but we oftentimes face people's responses when we talk about be intentional around improving access and enabling physical activity in the built environment. And people will say something like, well, I go to the gym at the end of the day. Or why do I need to go for a walk when I could drive? There are countries in the world, and this actually is very interesting, where it's very much a wealth component, that if you have the money to drive to work, why would you walk? I've even heard people tell me in different parts of the world that the International Wellbeing Institute operates in, that they try to walk to work, and people have consistently tried to pick them up. So there's so much that we need to break down today, and that we do on a daily basis with the work that we have in front of us to create environments that enable people to feel good about physical activity, to decrease, sedentary behaviors, and to really start to challenge some of these deeply embedded misconceptions around what is physical activity, physical inactivity, and sedentary lifestyle. So you're the perfect person to talk to about this. I love that you also were like almost a professional skier. I just think that's so much fun. You have this really cool background, and of course are educated and trained in public health. So I wish we were doing this interview on a ski slope is really what I mean to say on that. So maybe next time, Vienna. But do tell everyone a little bit about your background, and in particular, because you lead the advisory on the movement concept. So you are positioned to talk to experts from multiple different disciplines. So I just kind of want to help people understand how we at IWBI navigate, our professional background, and also then are able to speak the language of multiple different disciplines that are coming together to help advise the well building standard.
Yeah, great question. Happy to share more. And I think you hit it right that our work here at IWBI is so multidisciplinary. And one of the most cherished things that I love about working here is how diverse that internal team really is, and the backgrounds and perspectives that we're bringing to the conversation to really do this work that's so important. So it's definitely a privilege and really fun to work with so many different great professionals and minds on this issue. But yeah, my background is in public health, as you mentioned. But prior to that, I really fell in love with this work. through getting into sports and physical activity as a young person. It's sort of a classic story, right? Like as a young person, sports and physical activity were a big part of my life, big part of my family's life. As you mentioned, I was a very competitive skier, so was really just that was entrenched in my day to day, and it launched me first into what I thought would be my career in physical therapy. And what I started to feel as I was progressing through that experience was this desire to really scale the impact I was having beyond just a one-on-one clinician and patient relationship, like really trying to figure out, how do I do more? How do I like get out of just one-on-one and make impact at scale, and help people reap the benefits of physical activity? That led me into my education path in public health. I moved to New York City and got my master's from Columbia. And I was really focused in my degree on epidemiology, which is really the study of how we study population health. So really building and embedding a lot of skills in my own toolbox around research methods and figuring out the best way to apply those to big public health challenges. And by the time I got to IWBI, that background was actually really beneficial to the work that we're doing. I co-lead the standard development team, where our focus as the sort of stewards of the Well Building Standard is to translate research into practice. And so having this background in public health, in research, and in epidemiology specifically has really allowed me to help us translate research from many different disciplines across all of the different concept areas, from air to lighting to my concept in movement to nourishment and equity work, into the Well Building Standard. So there's a couple of us that have that background on the standard development team, but as I mentioned, it's really diverse. We have designers and architects and engineers on our team, and we have public health professionals across a variety of different disciplines. And so it's just a really collaborative effort, but centered around the work we do, or central to the work we do, is translating work of researchers into strategies that are applied globally around the Well Building Standard. And that's a really fun, challenging niche to sink into.
Yeah. So I'm also a public health, groupie here as well. And the thing about public health is that we often know scientifically what we need to do. In the case of focusing on movement, we can understand the impact of physical activity on the human body systems, right? We can study musculoskeletal or musculoskeletal injuries. So we can understand and know that. Even when we know it, it doesn't mean people do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I just came from an appointment this morning in which I tried to use the stairs in the building. Not only did I get locked out on floor 6 as I was running, of course, not on time, and then I had to walk down, 6 flights of stairs. And where did it exit me? Next to the trash can, per usual. And it's like, wow, even when we know that we could just insert physical activity in these micro movements, throughout the day, we are not designing and building spaces that prioritize that. And if you saw these concrete stairs in the middle of Arlington, Virginia, which, by the way, was a health appointment, so just want to, say as an issue, that they should be considering how people can be more physically active to get to that appointment. So we know what we need to do often for the body and for physical health and well-being and mental health when it comes to movement, but we're not doing it, right? There's still challenges. And part of what Well does is say, let's meet you in those challenges. Let's write the script. Let's look at the strategies. Let's actually recognize and credit you, project, for doing this. And it's not always costly. In fact, oftentimes it's not, to the point, and I'm sure you can share stories around, just cans of paint in internal staircases make people excited to use the stairs versus using the elevator. So this is not always expensive, but there is a knowledge gap. So let's dig into some of that knowledge gap and some of these key topics right now that you're really focused on around the movement concept.
Yeah, great question. And I think one of the big challenges that I've been excited to see progress on is we talked a little bit about this at the top of the call, really the focus on light activity, right? I think for many of us, we think of the trip to the gym or that HIIT class or that 30-minute run, whatever. It's these big moments of physical activity, intense physical activity that count, right? And that's all that matters. And what we've seen over the last 10 years in the research is that that's not the case, right? It's really that these micro movements, that the activities of everyday living, walking the dog, getting the mail, running groceries, taking your kiddos to the bus stop, like all of these really small things that we do throughout the day accumulate this light intensity physical activity that's actually really beneficial for health and well-being. And I think that shift in the literature and in our understanding of how physical activity really impacts health has been one of the biggest success stories in physical activity in this field over the last 10 years. And one of the things that's really allowed us to do that is advances in wearable technology. And previously, we were really reliant on self-reported measures of activity. So you can imagine as a public health researcher yourself that self-reported measures are super flawed. They're sure a gold standard, and in many cases, those same physical activity surveys still are the gold standard method, but they're flawed. We overestimate the activity that we contribute to, and we tend to only remember the big things that we do, and we forget about those activities of daily living that are important. And when we introduced wearables into the research space and really saw a lot of advances, we were able to really hone in on how important small, light micro movements are, which has been huge in our ability to convince building owners, convince organizations that they play a role in this issue. Because otherwise, they're not a gym, they're not they're not a track where people are running around. So, previously it was sort of like, okay, how do I actually make an influence on this? But really what we've seen is that because light activity is so critical, that's where buildings and organizations really have the most sway. And that's where these strategies come in. It's about how the space creates an ecosystem of opportunities for movement and invites that movement. It's where those stairs are placed. It's how beautifully designed they are. It's how the floor plate promotes movement to different zones where you might get collaborative work done, where you might get private or personal work done, where you might go find nature to take a break and restore or have a mindful lunch. It's how the entire space works together to promote how we move throughout the space and interact with all of the things that benefit us and benefit our health and well-being. So I love that has been a small win in helping buildings and organizations become real agents of public health and understand really where their role is.
And if we go a little back in time within public health, if you go back even 25 years, we did not study the built environment the way that we do now. In fact, actually, when I was going through my training education, there was not a class on the built environment and health. And that's something that to this day, I still teach a class at Georgetown, hoping to change that. In fact, at the time, there was a major disease that was coming on the scene, and the numbers were going up and up and up. And this was a man-made epidemic. So thank you, US. And we made it a pandemic, which was obesity. And at the time, the research was saying, well, there's two ways to address this, right? So we're going to reduce calorie intake and we're going to increase physical activity. So Vienna, how'd that work for us? Because we didn't quite get there. In fact, it's really astounding for me because 20 years ago, we thought we had some insight. If we just told people, eat less, work out more, surely that'll fix obesity. Oh, wait, it didn't. And so the built environment, we are studying that as a critical intervention. And this isn't just pills, right? This isn't thinking about a new diet plan. This is a change fundamentally in our life. And a lot of people, when you talk to them about obesity, it's not that they want to be obese and they want to change. right? But a lot of the strategies are saying you have to do something. You got to call a number, change your diet, you got to talk to a nutritionalist, you got to, join a gym. And those are really powerful things. But you have to take action in ways that many people found debilitating. In the built environment, you don't have to ask permission, sign up for a plan. You just have to use the stairs. Or the bathroom just is situated far enough away that you need to walk across, right, the floor plate to get to the bathroom versus it being right next to you. Or we're very intentional around where parking and transit options are. And one of the leading ways to prevent obesity that has been studied is looking at what we sort of term the active versus passive commuting concept. So if you have to move to get to where you need to go, it's not physical activity, it's just getting where you need to be. So those concepts were really incredible when it comes to obesity, because this isn't saying tomorrow start that perfect plan. It was today, just create those light activity moments. Think about getting to work, getting home, and how that's incorporated. I would love to get your take as someone, as an expert in this area around, even when we know movement is so critical, how do we start to design and create spaces that enable people to more, I think, effectively bring in exercise into their life? And how is that part of such a critical conversation on obesity?
Yeah, great question. And I think the shift in our understanding of the value and importance of light activity has really emphasized the role that the built environment plays overall in creating or hindering those opportunities. And so there's several different ways that the well building standard really guides projects through making those choices of how their space can be designed to promote activity. And it's actually one of my favorite strategies in the standard is really all about active commuting. And since you brought that up, we'll dig into that a little bit. But yeah, active commuting is an interesting one because it's really at that intersection of activity of daily living. It's something that we do, that we can do every day, that accumulates a light amount of physical activity that's also utilitarian in nature. And so it's really a very classic definition of the activities that we think of day to day. And organizations, I think, can take two really important roles. And this is addressed in feature VO4, which is all about active commuting. There's two components that are really important. We look at the building scale and what the building is providing and doing to make active commuting a little bit easier, a little bit more feasible and more attractive. In that sense, we think about where are you going to put your bike when you arrive? Where are you going to change out of your clothes? At least if you're American, if you're Dutch, you don't change, you don't care about that. But in the United States, we probably will change after we commute. But yeah, where are you going to put all your stuff? If you need a shower, is that available to you? And is there a safe and secure place to store this bicycle that you might have really heavily invested in? So we look at end of trip facilities at the building scale. We make sure that we make sure that there's enough bike parking available, enough variety of bike parking available. And we also want to see and encourage projects to locate lockers, changing rooms, shower facilities kind of proximate to that space. Then we also really, though, need the community level approach, right? So if it doesn't matter if your building has that infrastructure in place, if it's not safe and feasible to bicycle from where people are coming from, it is a lost strategy. So we pair that end of trip facility approach in the well building standard with also encouraging projects to site themselves in a location that's really friendly to active commuting. And one of the really important pieces of active commuting that we see in the literature is that having really robust, safe, well-designed bike networks really is helping to make cycling and active commuting more accessible to a more diverse audience, right? So big factor for women in active commuting is whether or not it's safe to get from A to B. That's one of the biggest barriers that women sort of self-report as discouraging them from active commuting. Same thing with students. There's a really great programming in the United States around safe routes to school, and really helping communities to create routes between neighborhoods and school that are safe, whether that's through bike lanes or walking paths. You'll often see crossing guards, probably local volunteers in your community that are helping to guide traffic for crossing stops. And so there's all of these different ways that the community is really critical, and that not only the building, but we also have to think of the community space as well.
I would love to put a case study example. So PLQ in Singapore is a project I encourage everyone to look at for active commuting, and it gives me chills to look at this project. So we're talking about multiple buildings, high-rise buildings, huge mall. So when you look at the before versus after, and because of how the Singapore Building Authority runs these projects, these plans must be put forward in advance clearly, and they actually have a different agreement with how they choose and select the builder. And in this case, what Lend-Lease has done was incredible. And they specifically cited well, because they were going to put a bike path out. There was going to be a nice space to sit, but it is so much more complicated than you think. So first off, a bike path with nowhere to change when the humidity is, I don't know, I was just there, so 150% about, joking, but 70 to 80%. And then you need to come into a work environment and your hair is messed up, you're sweaty, right? You don't feel like that's appropriate. So you put a bike path in, but if you don't put a changing room in, then human behavior is going to reflect that's probably not going to work long term. Then they started thinking about even issues of childcare. So if you are going to be walking or riding, and then you have a child that you're going to be also bringing with you, they thought about even parking for, bicycles and such that had that additional carrier with them, so they could drop a child off. Mm-hmm. And the stories that came from this, I'm getting chills, Vienna, because this is why we do the work that we do, but it's just people saying like their life has changed because they could safely commute and walk to work and then walk home. And what that gives you is a space to think, a space to, oftentimes you'll report people say they're de-stressed, or it allows them to sort of disengage work and prepare themselves for home versus just fighting traffic, and then walking into a toddler. Mm-hmm. Which, as we both know very well, Vienna is stressful, right? And this is very important psychologically. So this gives you a moment to let down and recover. Then people say that they meet other colleagues on the path. So we have a casual collision, which is what we'd study from a design perspective and say, that's very beneficial. You now know who you work with and you care about who you work with. If you have more people using that path, eyes and ears are on the street, less crime, because the more people are frequenting the space, then less crime. And of course, Singapore did not experience the same issues with COVID and the hybrid scenario. So we have the majority of the population returning to work. But the stories go on and on. And what I want to say is that too often we'll hear a client who will kind of say, well, yeah, just put a bike path in, put a bike rack, and encourage people to use a bicycle. No, it's not that. It's much more complex when you study human behavior. And it is, if you study your own psychology, just think how many times you felt guilty or bad because you didn't get to the gym. And first off, changing the idea that the gym is the answer. Second off, thinking about the issues of accessibility, or I don't want to mess up my hair, or what am I wearing to work, or how do I pick up my kid? And that's the difference we make in the built environment. When we make the easy choice, the healthy choice, it's not hard to maintain health. And that's what we're up to. But those very prescriptive details in the active commuting feature of WELL are critical. So you don't just say it and think it's going to work. You're building on the legacy of understanding human behavior when it comes to just inserting these light movements, throughout the day. So kudos on that incredible work. And I encourage people to look up PLQ. It's still under development. So it's still being designed and developed, but there are several buildings that are already open in Singapore that you can check out. Awesome. Well, that's the active commuting feature. Are there any other features that you'd like to dig into and kind of explain a little bit of the story behind them, or just help people understand, the depth and breadth of research and advisory that goes into the development of some of the movement concepts and features?
Yeah, another favorite of mine is really a very visual feature, a very visual signal of, hey, you're in a well space. And that's all about active furnishings and ergonomic design. So we have a couple of strategies in Well that tackle these topics. The precondition, VO2, all about ergonomic workstations. And then there's two optimizations, VO7, active furnishing. So your sit stand, your if you're brave, your tread desk or your bike desk. And then the beta strategy, V11, which is all about ergonomic programming. And I love these three together. They're great when implemented together, and they really help to set one another up. So for active projects, sort of exploring that set of features, they really are progressive and build upon one another. But I love them because they are that visual cue that you're in a well space. You know, being able to see different types of workstations that are really designed for people, designed for the type of work that we do in the spaces that we're in, that do have that that ability to get light activity. They, you know, sit, stand, you can walk, you can bike at your desk, whatever it may be. They're such a fun visual indicator, but they're also a really good example of something that you raised before, which is really around culture of health and culture of movement. It's not just enough to put that bike rack in your building, to put that active workstation in your building. You have to create the culture and the other types of design infrastructure to really support and encourage people to utilize that. Early on in the healthy building movement, sit-stand desks were easy thing to spec into your design, right? And people would get really frustrated with, I put 50% of, you know, 50% of my desks or 100% of my desks even as active workstations, and nobody uses them. Well, it just sometimes takes a couple of people to feel weird about standing, and everyone's looking at me because I'm the one that's standing, to kill that spark and that culture of movement in that space. And so it's really what we've seen and heard, and what we find in the literature is that continuing to promote and push and provide the policy and the cultural encouragement, that this is great behavior that we encourage and that we love and that we want to see. That's really sometimes what's needed to help folks adopt a new behavior. And we sort of see that playing out even in the literature when you take away that intervention where it's being promoted and being nudged and being reminded. We see people trail off, right? We see the behavior that we want to see start to decrease. And we see that in the real world as well. So sometimes it's not as simple as putting the thing in, you have to also really promote it. But one of my favorites, because I'll just say one of my favorites, just because it's a really visual indicator. And I think with as well, the rise of remote and hybrid work, I love that these strategies are now being tested and shown to be tried and true and beneficial in all of this new work dynamic that we're having to deal with. Organizations are increasingly wanting to see or wanting to be able to provide ergonomic active workstations in home environments to really provide equity to what they're providing in their satellite office or in their headquarters. And so we're seeing organizations do really creative, innovative, and impactful things for folks who are remote and hybrid. And we're also seeing a real shift in the way that the home off or the headquarters is designed. The type of workstations that we're incorporating is shifting because the type of work that we're doing in that space is different. Pre-pandemic, we were there 5 days a week and I had my workstation and this is where I was, but now we need much more collaborative spaces and we need much more variety. And that's always been a need, but is I think hyper emphasized now, where we really want to see more collaborative spaces, less individual workspace, and really trying to figure out how to make those active and still encourage movement. Has been really interesting and is something that's really taking off and exciting to see in the design community.
I couldn't agree more. It's this, I call it agreement reality. You agreed to have everyone sit, and that became your reality, and your beige desk and your beige wallpaper with your beige partition, until one day someone didn't. And then you asked yourself, is that reality, or do we just agree that everyone has to sit down? And I give a lot of lectures in classrooms where everyone, the cue is come in, sit down, and shut up. That's what chair does. Then it says the person talking is more important because you're sitting. And people don't realize how deeply baked in that is. And actually what we're doing in just creating soft seating, you're creating, the sort of high tops, you're taking out that stadium seating, you're creating a level in which people are not talking down or at you, but they're talking with you, right? We have students, we have colleagues that are dealing with obesity. So we actually, one of the more popular chairs in healthcare that was developed was a bariatric chair. That's a chair and a half. So that also is used. So when you design for extremes or a small part of the population, you actually get benefit the means. So new parents that are coming in with lots more gear, for example, also like to have a chair like that. So don't just give me one option, give me multiple options, right? Allow me to get up through the day. Something I talk to a lot with folks, and myself, I'm guilty of this. So I studied, musculoskeletal disease, I studied ergonomics, and something that's very common is if we, sit in a chair like this over a period of the day, you just kind of slowly start hunching over. And we don't realize that the muscles right here, right, are actually tightening. They're very good at pulling us in. And the muscles in our back here, right, so that the lats, you're not pulling or extending back. And so that affects diaphragmatic breathing. And that's going to affect how energetic you feel. And blood, we look at the red blood cell count, like this is so directly linked. And why do you think after 8 hours of not moving and shallow breathing like this, not to mention staring at a screen all day, do we just feel beige and depleted and tired? And then we say it's our fault. It's our fault. And I'm going to argue it's the environment. We plant these seeds in the crack of a concrete and expect it to grow, and we don't give those seeds the resources, the nourishment, and the water, and the sunlight, and the space. And what the movement concept is doing in so many ways is examining that the spaces that we spend time in will fundamentally shift how long and well you live. And even that feeling that you get in an office at the end of the day where you've just been sitting, shallow breathing, not moving, is going to deeply contribute. And so I couldn't agree more at shifting the agreement reality. We've been doing this for a while, and there's a lot of people early on who are like, that is super weirdo to stand when you work. Those are the exact same people that don't want to sit ever again. But it takes a while, your boss has got to get into it. Some people don't like to be, above or below others. Sometimes it takes our body, and it probably will take your body a while to adjust to standing. Don't stand the entire day either. There's actually, what we think of as sort of protocol or recommendations on the sit-stand side of it. So we are absolutely changing the way people worked. I mean, Vienna, it's like you think back about the pictures in occupational health of 150 years ago, and you had the pit that everyone was working in, the typewriters, and bosses were looking down at, and you weren't supposed to move, really. So we are absolutely changing the world in that space. So with that in mind, part of the work that we have today and bringing Vienna on to talk about the history of the well-building standard and the movement concept in particular is that we have a lot of hard work ahead of us, right? And we are asking you to be up to the challenge. And although many things have changed and evolved in the market, we are, facing a time in which we're seeing certain buildings, certain regions that are saying, does it matter to invest in health? Why does it matter? What's the business case? And today we've really shared with you that the way that the well-building standard is developed and the way that it is executed is based on cutting edge research, our advisors, and we are tracking and understanding the impact of these strategies benefit human health, well-being, which means healthier, happier employees, particularly when we deal with issues of cardiovascular disease. Cancer is related to this, particularly around heavy and light physical activity, and of course, obesity. But we need your help. So Vienna, maybe close us out on where is an area that, as a call to action for our community listening to this, where do we need help in taking the movement concept forward?
Yeah, I think two areas, and I feel like many of my colleagues would share something similar in their own topic areas, is that, in public health research, we still have an equity challenge, and we still have an equity challenge on implementation. So it's, I think, a call to action for two different groups of people for research, and from that part of the spectrum, continuing to embed more diverse voices into the research that you're doing to understand what are the health challenges that we're grappling with for different communities, and what is really shown to work for very specific and targeted communities. Because what we know is that there are so many disparities present across how all of these different environmental and built environment issues influence health for different people, and what works is different. So really getting the public health community continuing to expand the research that we're doing to cover more diverse voices is critical. And then on the other side, on the implementation, as folks implementing the WELL building standard in their organization, in their buildings, continuing to make sure that we're bringing diverse voices to the table, and making sure that we're not just designing for one, we're designing for many, and really thinking about what the communities, the employees, the people who's going to be using our spaces, what they want, what they need. So continuing to really use that integrative design approach, making sure that we're bringing more people to the table to inform those decisions, will really just make how you apply the roadmap of the WELL building standard even more impactful when you make sure that many people are weighing in on the approach. So I would say that's the big call to action for us. We've learned so much over the last 10, 20 years in the physical activities field, and we always have more to learn and get more targeted and tailored in the approaches that we're taking. So excited to see what the next several years brings in this space.
That's incredible, Vienna. And I will actually ask you to also help our audience just learn a little bit about what we're doing with the WELL equity rating super briefly, but I could not emphasize the point that you just made enough, is that the example I gave earlier around obesity, and that the solution was eat less and work out more, and not thinking about actually the diversity of populations and the challenges in that really, really set us back. And when we're talking about movement, for example, today, we're not talking only about those that are able-bodied when we talk about movement, right? And when it comes to saying just hop on a bike, that's not the same depending on the neighborhood you're coming from or what the expectations are of your workplace. And this list goes on and on around how the more that we listen and pay attention, the richer and more powerful our strategies are because they're more inclusive. So can you just let people know too about how movement has been incorporated with the WELL equity rating and how that's also strengthened our work in the movement concept?
Yeah, that's a great question. When we looked at incorporating WELL strategies into the equity rating, we really undertook a multi-year process of listening and learning with the community, really focused on convening diverse voices to inform the types of strategies that we were embedding in that program. And specifically around movement, we were really focused on design strategies that meet the needs of lots of different bodies, lots of different users, lots of different needs. So we've really focused on active design, particularly active workstations in the WELL equity rating. And really from an ergonomic standpoint, the foundation of that field is really about designing for many. Designing for the extremes and really making sure that we're not just looking at the typical body type, but that we're really designing for as much of the population as we can. So those strategies were really well aligned already with the intent, but we were able to really do more listening and learning and understand where we needed to push the bar and raise the bar more. A couple of other strategies that we focus on were in how fitness spaces or gym space, activity spaces were designed to be inclusive of different types of users, making sure that fitness equipment had wide approach, where different types of users with different mobility needs could utilize the space. Just a couple of examples of how we're really looking to push the bar through design to really make sure that we're meeting the needs of as many people as possible. So would love to follow up with this video with some more links to the equity rating where folks can learn a little bit more, not only about the development story, which was so incredibly rich and robust, but really about the incredibly important strategies in that roadmap and in that tool.
Well, thank you, Vienna. We've come to the end of our time together, but not at the end of having this really robust conversation about the critical role of movement in health and well-being in our built environment globally. So stay tuned. Join us on the Well Forum so you can reach Vienna, ask us your questions. We'd like to hear your case studies, your examples, or frankly, just your struggles of how you've incorporated movement more into your life and how the science and research is helping to influence you, your work, your family in different ways. So stay tuned. But for now, I just want to thank Vienna for your wealth of knowledge, your continued commitment, and of course, the passion that you have, because it just fills up my tank around the incredible work that we've done and the work that we have to do in the movement around building health globally. So thank you so much, Vienna.
Thank you.